welcome to the Integrate This EdTech Podcast. I'm David Berner, joined by co-host Jeremy Mikla. And today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Catlin Tucker. Very excited to have Catlin with us and talk about all the different things that she speaks about and works on, including a number of different books on station rotation, UDL, blended learning, gives a lot of different talks and at speaking engagements. So Catlin, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you with us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
And to kind of kick things off a little bit, can you tell us, so maybe prior to where you're at today with a lot of your different speaking engagements and the books and things like that, where did you start off in your career with teaching?
Yeah, I'm actually shocked. I wound up in this profession. I'm not going to lie. I thought I was going to be an attorney until my senior year at UCLA, and then went on a trip where my girlfriend and I worked as baristas in Ireland. And I thought, you know what? I want a job where I can travel and I can write. And then I was like, what can I do with this English degree? Wandered into education, almost like by default. And the first 5 years were awful. I almost quit. I just felt like in credential school, I'd gone and got my credential and my master's at UC Santa Barbara. I had all these very elaborate fantasies about what my future classroom was going to look like. I imagined kids being excited to bound through the door, let's get learning together. And those first 5 years were rough. I just could not actualize this classroom I had dreamed about. Kids did not seem excited to be there. They were not engaging with me, with each other, really with the content. And I just remember thinking, I cannot do this for my entire life. Maybe I have made a huge mistake going into education. And I was at this moment of career crisis and actually pressed pause on the decision to stay or leave this field, and had my first child. And when I was home doing a kind of a year at home with my daughter, I taught online college level writing courses. And it was in that mode as an entirely online professor where my interest in technology was started to be piqued. So when I was thinking about going back to the classroom, I figured, you know what, I'm just going to give it one more year. I'm going to treat this classroom like a laboratory. We'll just try a whole bunch of stuff, see what works, ask my students for feedback. And if I can't turn this around, I'm going to leave the profession anyway, so I don't really have anything to lose. And it was in that almost unlearning everything I thought I knew about teaching where I was able to create this classroom that I had dreamed about. And I did not have a lot of technology. I was in a low-tech school. It was 2008. I was capitalizing on the devices coming through the door in my kids' pockets. And at that point, there were not that many of them. But it didn't take much tech and it didn't take much experimentation for me to totally fall in love with teaching. And also to really appreciate how incredibly capable these young humans were. And so I taught in a high school English language arts classroom in a public school in Northern California for 16 years. I began coaching and working with teachers and teaching part-time, eventually decided to get my doctorate. And now I teach teacher candidates at Pepperdine University and get to travel all over the world, working with teachers, designing customized workshops and trainings for them to experience the very things I want them to do with students in their classrooms. So feel very fortunate.
So yeah, and it sounds like a lot of the things, I liked what you said about unlearning everything. You had to kind of start from scratch again and figure out what's going to work for you to approach it. So with looking at some of your work now and, your speaking engagements or just looking at the books and things like that, how many of those different experiences early on sparked different ideas for the various books that you have?
Yeah, I remember. So there are a lot of very incredibly inspiring folks in education, but I would say if I have a superpower, it is taking things that feel complicated and breaking them down into strategies and steps and protocols and routines that feel doable for educators. So when I was kind of blundering my way through integrating technology in the early days into my classroom and also leveraging my students' tech at home and reimagining the kinds of tasks they did once they left the room, I started blogging and sharing what I was doing online. My blog started to get a lot of traffic, and I decided to write my first book on blended learning. And again, it was very much early days for me of just trying to kind of share what I had learned through a lot of trial and error, quite frankly, as well as all of the resources I was designing to support my students in doing this more successfully. So I think everything, whenever I'm learning something, the best way for me to internalize it, make sense of it, and really like cement it for myself is to write about it, whether that's a blog, and then often my blogs kind of spiral into books. I work with so many teachers where I get to hear firsthand, what are the pain points? What are the things they're struggling with? What are they seeing in classrooms? I go in and out of tons of classrooms every year. And that also really inspires me because I want to help design things for teachers that allow them to spend their finite time and energy in spaces that are more rewarding and enjoyable and kind of, light them up instead of drain them.
So is it then from that, the you talked about the 1 year that you had where you were teaching online, and then you have the experience with the traditional classroom, and then when you come back again, is that where you really started to pull together these ideas on blended learning? Like, and maybe, I'd like to hear what you say blended learning is, because I maybe my version of it where you combine a little bit of digital online with the real life in person work that students are doing maybe isn't as accurate as what you might portray it to be.
Yeah, so I define it pretty simply as active engaged learning online combined with active engaged learning offline, with the goal of giving students more control over pace, place, path, and time. So they're not going to control all of those things all the time, but the goal is to give them more control over those aspects of their learning experience. And I would say there's a ton of misconceptions about blended learning, especially since a lot of educators never even heard that phrase before COVID, and
Right.
nobody enjoyed COVID. So if you're associating blended learning with COVID, it's not a real strong sell for a lot of teachers. And I always kind of like, I don't know, I get so frustrated because I'm like, I wrote my first book on blended learning in 2010, right? Far, like way before COVID. I think I'd written like 4 books on blended learning by the time COVID came around. So unfortunately, COVID kind of soured people, I think, on the phrase. And I think it's really interesting that we're in this moment right now where there's all this pushback against technology in classrooms, and people are like, oh, this tech, it's like, it's ruining the learning experience. It's just a distraction. And I'm like, that's because the tech was never paired with strong pedagogical practices. Like blended learning created these pathways that would have allowed teachers to design with a high level of intentionality when it comes to technology. But instead, we just gave them tech. We gave them no new teaching practices, really. And so the tech just became this like add-on or like a substitute for things kids can do offline, or maybe it like improves a workflow for teachers, but it might not even improve the learning experience for students. So I think it's so interesting in this moment where people are pushing back against tech, and I'm like, I feel like if we had leaned into blended learning models and we had thought about how to use these kind of tech enhanced instructional approaches, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now.
Is it, I think back to when I was in the classroom, and it's probably right around that time frame of, I would say about 2009, 2010. And our school that I was teaching at went one-to-one with iPads. And we brought in someone to come in and see, I remember him starting with the very, very basics. This is how you turn on your iPad. This is how you shift or you swipe the screen to find different apps and select them. And then he went into, I swear, probably 50 different apps on the iPad that you can do stuff with. And that was kind of the introduction that our whole staff got to using, that tool, right? And all of the apps that came with it. And I feel like that's exactly what you're talking about here as we kind of transition, or we have been transitioned into this age of AI. And I feel like that process has repeated itself, that we're placing the tools in front of the skills, or we're placing the apps in front of the pedagogy. And, that just is that recipe for disaster. And I feel like, as someone with a history background, I feel like we didn't learn from the past, so we're condemned to repeat it.
No, I wrote this exact thing for an ISTE ASCD blog where I was just like, basically, are we going to repeat all of the mistakes of the ed tech boom, which was, to your point, here's the tool, here's all the functionality and how it works, but not how do you weave this into a lesson in a way that is meaningful? And we are doing the exact same thing with AI. I literally released a kind of free K-12 skills before tools AI implementation guide for this exact reason, because I was like, we have to be teaching students long before they ever interact with AI, the skills that they will actually need to be responsible dynamic users of AI. But right now, I agree. I worry that like districts are like, oh, we need AI. We're going to buy this big platform or whatever. The companies folks will come in, train teachers, but the training is going to be mostly focused on how you navigate the platform, how you use it, not necessarily how do you design lessons where these tools are really allowing students more control over their experience, more personalization. I just feel like we're totally doing what we did back when all the ed tech tools exploded.
Right. And I feel there is a little bit of a place. A teacher does need to have a basic understanding of what the capabilities
Oh,
of
for
the
sure.
tools and the devices that they're working. So I get there is a place for that, but I think it's asking the wrong questions first. So if a teacher comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to purposefully integrate technology into what I'm doing," and maybe it's AI, what are the questions they should be asking first?
Yeah, I think, well, when I work with teachers, I'm like, what are your pain points? Like, what is challenging about your work right now? Is it giving timely feedback? Is it, the grading trail? Like, what is it that you're really struggling with? And what is it that you think students would really benefit the most from? And then let's let that just like drive some of our decision making. But for example, right now, I think that the potential for AI to allow students literally limitless amounts of guidance and feedback as they work and write is very exciting. However, when I work with teachers, I'm like, okay, what are we building around that experience so students are staying the kind of cognitively engaged one, but also not just kind of shifting the thinking over or the work over to AI? Can we build kind of some metacognitive reflective process around that AI use? So something even as simple as like a spin on the classic like exam wrapper, right? So before you use AI, why are you using AI? What questions do you have? What are you struggling with? Where do you need support? Okay, now we're going to interact with an AI tool that gives us feedback. And then on the back end, what did you learn? What went well? What surprised you from the interaction? How did you make sure that the work still remained your kind of authentically yours? Like simple kind of guardrails around use can help students to kind of stay engaged and make sure they're really thinking about how they're using it and how the use is impacting their thinking and their work and all of these things. But I don't even know if that's really happening at this point. It's just like, hey, go to this station or open your Chromebooks and, basically interact with this AI tool to get feedback on what you're working with. Not like, hey, what kinds of questions should you be asking? What's the reflective practice we should build around this?
It's interesting to hear you say reflection as many times as you just did right there. Do you think that because I completely agree. I
Yeah.
think that's oftentimes, an overlooked thing when teachers are, and say my pain point is, ending a lesson and getting students to really internalize what it was from that lesson I wanted them to get out of it. And
Mhm.
one great way to do that is to have some sort of a reflective activity where students are looking back or they're thinking about how could they apply what they've learned to a different or new situation. And is that, do you think, one small thing that teachers could use AI to help them develop better reflective questions that they can
Oh,
send to issues that would have a big impact on student learning?
absolutely. I mean, the one of the books I wrote, Elevating Educational Design with AI, is all about how we harness AI to improve our design work so that we're better serving diverse populations of learners. And so whether it is, hey, help me create a guided note template that gets kids thinking about the content and interacting with it in dynamic ways during direct instruction, or hey, help me build a would you rather reflective option for the end of my class that gets kids thinking about what did they learn, what wonderings do they still have. Absolutely. But I think the reality we have to face is that the reason so often we don't see metacognitive skill building and reflection in classrooms, even though we know those things are just have myriad benefits, from executive functioning to self-regulation to motivation and achievement, is because we're so busy racing through content, we don't have time for it, right? So it's just one of those things that's super easy to neglect.
So as you kind of look at UDL and you look at blended learning, where do the two things meet? Where like if you're looking at like an outline for a lesson and you're wanting to get to all learners, you're wanting to provide a variety of different approaches, what would be your first suggestion for a teacher to start incorporating those things into a lesson?
Yeah, well, I have to just say, my path crossed with Dr. Katie Novak right around the beginning of COVID, and I had been pretty, like, UDL was on my radar, but it was really in working with Katie around this intersection of blended learning and UDL that was so incredibly powerful for me. Because what I think these two do together that's really special is that UDL's like everybody's on, like most people are on board. You know, it's not hard to sell, hey, let's make learning accessible and inclusive and equitable. Like most educators are like, heck yeah, let's do that. Blended learning is a tougher sell, but the reality is UDL is really wonderful, but it can feel hard to operationalize for teachers. Like, how do I do this every day in a way that feels sustainable? So when you pair UDL with blended learning, now you have much more flexible learning pathways that you can choose from, whether it's self-pacing with a playlist, whether it is, station rotation so the teacher can provide differentiated direct instruction. So what was interesting about the pairing is I think blended learning without UDL can sometimes result in shallow technology integration. But without blended learning, UDL can feel really hard to implement in a way that is sustainable, which is why these two are really powerful. And so when I talk to educators, one of the things I tell them is, when we start thinking about universal design, one of the first things I emphasize when I work with groups is start thinking proactively about barriers. No matter what it is we're asking students to do in the classroom, we have to be, as the architects of that learning experience, trying to identify and proactively remove barriers. So even starting with something as simple as a would you rather option at key moments in the lesson. How do you want to engage with content? What strategy would help you process and make meaning here? What option would you like to try to demonstrate and share your learning? Those simple would you rather options at key moments can be so kind of simple in terms of creating, and AI is great for creating them, but they also really help to remove those barriers for learners, where learners might say, I think I'm going to choose this option today. This feels more manageable, doable for me personally.
So it seems safe to say that like blending learning is a bit of the key to allowing to reach UDL more effectively. Is that fair to say?
I definitely believe that. I think that if we're, if UDL is really kind of grounded in the reality that learner variability is the norm. Kids are just different from each other, and as a result, they learn differently. And the reality that if we want all students to reach firm standard aligned goals, then we have to provide flexible pathways for them to get wherever they're starting to that firm goal, right? Like the pushback against the word equity in the last few years kind of blows my mind, because I'm just like, all equity is like acknowledging is that individual learners need individual inputs to reach a particular output. So a single lesson for an entire class is unlikely to get everybody in that class with all their different skills and abilities and readiness levels and language proficiencies from wherever they're starting in their learning journey to the same destination, right? Kids are going to need different levels of scaffolding and support, different amounts of teacher time and energy input. And that's really hard to accommodate when the only instructional model we have and are comfortable using is the whole group teacher-led model.
Yeah. And so with the whole screen time debate that's going on too, do you feel like blended learning is something that needs to be considered as you're talking about screen time, because and the connection to UDL as well, because it's not, we've talked about this before, but it's not as simple as just removing the screens, because there are students that are going to be able to work with those to be able to achieve certain things that otherwise wouldn't have had that possibility. So do you feel like that belongs in there? Or if someone was to ask you, how does that connect to screen time, what would you say is like the best response for that?
I would say the whole focus on screen time feels like it's missing the entire point to me, right? The American Academy of Pediatrics released a policy paper in which they very clearly stated it's not really screen time. Like it's not its own metric that can be good or bad. It's what are they doing on the screen that actually matters. And so I think the work we need to be doing in education is auditing the kinds of tasks students are doing online. And let me say, I am a huge advocate of balance. So when I talk about blended learning, I'm like, our goal, regardless of the instructional model, the blended learning model we're using, is to balance the online with the offline, right? You have a whole group of like 30 odd kids in a room. Learning is in part a social endeavor. They should not just be staring at screens all class long. That makes literally no sense. This is their opportunity to have discussions, to collaborate, to debate ideas, to work together to solve problems. Like, let's not ignore that. But also, like, when we put them on the screen, what on earth are we asking them to do? Because what I observe in a lot of classrooms is that the technology work is isolating learners, right? They are asked to go on the computer and play a educational game or work through some personalized adaptive software or watch a video and answer questions, right? Very rarely is the technology a catalyst for students to work together, to do something, to communicate, collaborate, think critically, creatively problem solve. And I don't understand that. I think that's a total missed opportunity. And I think actually my origin story of my own integration of technology in my class, I credit not having tech for every kid, because I realized one group of 4 kids collaborating around a phone, an iPad, a Chromebook could do incredible things, and they had really meaningful conversations. I almost think in classrooms today, when everybody has a computer open, it creates that barrier to human connection. And if all kids are doing are those isolating tasks or essentially digital worksheets or even taking notes on computers, which we know from the research is not best practice, yeah, then I totally understand the pushback. But I do think when we had all this tech going into classrooms, we trained teachers on instructional models like station rotation that is designed to allow teachers to work with small groups, balance the individual, the collaborative, the online, the offline, I don't think we would be having the same situation, the same pushback happening. I think it's the poor use of technology and the abundance of low quality screen time that is the problem.
Yeah, and that's how we view it as well. It's like and it's consistent to like what is the foundational level that needs to be there before you start introducing tools and things like that. It should serve the purpose of the design, and especially when it comes to like collaboration and those type of things. I want to shift just a little bit because Jeremy and we both often do professional development for teachers, as you do as well. And I'm wondering if you could just take kind of those same concepts and explain to us like what would be, as you shift from students in pre-K to 12. What does this look like at the adult level with adult learners? In that perspective, it's a different audience. What do you find as different there in terms of how you might use UDL in blended learning?
Well, adults are very different from teaching teenagers or younger students, and teaching educators is a different experience. Like we sometimes we show up for professional learning in ways that I'm like, we would not be okay with our students showing up in the classroom this way. And that I remember like feeling like that was a really big adjustment for me. But I will say, in my graduate classes with my teacher candidates or with teachers in trainings, I am using the exact strategies. I am modeling the exact things that I am asking them to do. So when we get together in the beginning of a training, we start with a welcome activity that is designed to allow them moments of connection, relationship building. Because I'm like, I think every single class that we teach should start that way. I don't think we should launch right into content before kids have a chance to turn and say hello to somebody, right? Like, I don't think community building should be relegated to the first week or month of a school year, but it needs to be threaded through every single day that we have human beings in our classrooms, especially human beings who increasingly struggle to make eye contact and have conversations because they're on little devices all the time, right? Then when we're, depending on the instructional approach, and I train teachers on, multi-tiered systems of support, like ways to kind of present tier 1, tier 2 in that's more effective, then I'm employing all those. Or if I'm coming into a district and we're learning how to design with station rotation model, and I'm talking about differentiation, I want them moving through a station rotation. I want to group students based on their subject area and provide instructional strategies at the teacher-led or Tucker-led station that are going to really work for math and science or English or history, right? So for me, it's really about weaving all of those pieces into my own training sessions with teachers. I want those to be hands-on. I want them to be practice-based. If they're engaging with content, I want to give them like a, would you rather read this blog or listen to this podcast, read this blog or watch this video, right? How do you want to interact with information? Or if I want everybody to watch a video on a topic, like maybe I'm trying to help them understand, like, what does an AI video look like? So I'm going to actually take something that I would present normally myself, have AI create a video, and I'm going to actually have you work in groups to use reciprocal teaching to unpack the video, pausing it every 2 minutes. So I want them to have those experiences. And the reason is I think the more they experience in training, the more likely they are to actually implement, and we get over that implementation gap. But I also totally recognize that at the end of one of my training days, teachers are like, I'm so tired. Like, you made us work so hard. And I'm like, my TED Talk was all about student-led learning. And when I design learning, it doesn't matter who the audience is, teachers, leaders, grad students, I want it to be student-led. I'm putting you in the position to drive this experience, and you are going to get as much out of it as you put in.
So I think a good example, would you rather listen to the Integrate This podcast or watch the Integrate This podcast on YouTube?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Those are your only two choices. So station rotation, you've written a book on it. You've mentioned it here several times already. Like, what exactly do you mean? What does that look like in practice? And why is that a good entry point for teachers into designing learning that's going to be beneficial to all learners?
Yeah, that's a great question. A station rotation model is by far the most popular blended learning model of the rotation models. So blended learning is like a pretty big spectrum. And over on one side are the rotation models. And that includes station rotation, the playlist model, whole group rotation, flipped classroom. These are all strategies or models, instructional approaches that work beautifully in a traditional classroom. And so that's where I tend to spend probably like 80% of of my time when it comes to working with schools and districts who are interested in blended learning. As you move down the spectrum, then you get to instructional models that tend to rely more and more on the online learning component, right? So you have like the flex model where kids are self-pacing through usually like a pre-planned online curriculum. And you have like a la carte where a kid taking normal classes might do credit recovery for a class, or they might be so advanced in a class their school doesn't offer that they take an online class to complement their traditional schedule. So there are lots of different models on that end of the spectrum that I don't spend as much time on. And I would say even of the rotation models, there's just something about station rotation that is like understandable enough, like relatable enough that teachers are like, okay, I get it. I'm going to try it. I think there's two misconceptions about station rotation. And first, the biggest one is that this is an elementary model, right? And I think that is really born out of this idea that, this is something they do in elementary, not something we do in secondary. And I think it's really a result of the fact that secondary teachers have like an expertise in some subject area. And so as the experts, there's a lot more of, I'm going to be at the front of the room, I'm going to be explaining things, lecturing, what have you. I also think that when we start to talk about small groups, there is this assumption that somehow this is like an intervention thing, not a traditional classroom thing. But the reality is station rotation is a K-12 model. And the biggest benefit, I believe, of station rotation is the opportunity for teachers to differentiate instruction for small groups. So if we are collecting pre-assessment data and the data tells us, whoa, kids are in really different places of readiness in terms of, or in relation to this concept or skill, why would we teach it whole group and then clean up the mess in small group and double the time we spend on that instruction, right? Why not start the instruction differentiated in small groups so we can make specific teacher moves at that small group station with 6 to 8 kids that is going to hopefully make that instruction much more accessible for learners. And then at the other stations, so there are 3 types of stations. There's the teacher-led, and differentiation is definitely whether it's instruction, modeling sessions, what have you, that's like the biggest benefit. Then you have an online station or stations, and offline station or stations. So right in the design is that nod to balance, right? We're not having kids at every screen at every station. They're getting instruction with the teacher. They have an online station and an offline station. The total number of stations totally depends on the length of your class period or how many days you're running the rotation or how many kids you want in a station. So I think it's a pretty simple design to understand. I think the biggest resistance, if I'm being quite honest with you, against this model is one, like teachers who are scared of the classroom management component, right? So if your method of classroom management is I control kids by having them in a group and kind of making them comply with what I'm asking them to do, then releasing more control over students by having them in the other stations where they have to be a bit more self-directed or they have to collaborate with peers to navigate a task, that becomes very, very scary for some teachers. And I will say the transition from whole group, one lesson for the entire class, which is often not accessible, definitely not equitable, often not inclusive, to station rotation, where you are designing differentiated instructional sessions and designing online and offline tasks, that feels like a big ask in terms of the time it takes to design. I will say AI has really made that so much more doable because I love the design part of this work. I'm like a total curriculum design dork. Like, I just think it's so fascinating, like a little puzzle of like, how do we create something for this particular group of students to learn this particular thing? But I get that that's not necessarily the norm. However, I think if we truly value like equity, inclusion, access, then we have to take a good look at our practices and ask, do our instructional practices align with our values? And I think station rotation is a really beautiful pathway to do that.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of the things that popped into my head as my maybe misconceptions or fears about them. Number one was it's an elementary thing.
Mhm.
And I think you hammered home the reasons why it's not, I think, very effectively. And I think the other piece that you talked about was classroom management. And, to me, yeah, I know as a new teacher, I definitely would have struggled with some of that. But at some point when I hit my stride or whatever, and I felt more comfortable with the students that were in my class, and I was able to kind of turn over some of that, me not having to look over their shoulder 24/7 in the classroom. And when I was able to do that, to give up, I think, a little bit of that control and combine that with establishing some routines of what are the expectations when you're going to be working in that station that is, not teacher
100%.
directed, and not interacting with other students, where you're going to be dealing with the online stuff. And then what are your expectations when you're having a discussion group with your peers, and I think kind of establishing some of those routines can definitely make it even more worthwhile and beneficial in the long run.
Well, and why would we start something new without establishing those expectations, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the piece that gets skipped over that I don't understand. Because I'm like, talk to your class, like co-create norms for station rotation lessons. What are we going
Mhm.
to agree to as a group that we think is going to help this run really smoothly? And what are we going to try to avoid because it might actually derail this lesson a little bit or distract the teacher? And teachers, like, tell them why you're doing this. You want to support small groups. You want to be able to meet their specific needs. And also have a clear path of consequences, right? I think one
Mhm.
of the biggest issues with power struggles I see in classrooms are teachers who also haven't like outlined, hey, if you distract me or you are clearly off task, this is the first thing you can expect. Maybe it's a verbal redirect. If that's good, great. If it's not, then you're going to have a physical move to a floater desk on the side of the room where you're working by yourself. Happens 3 times, we're getting a parent or a family member on the phone and we're going to talk about what's going on with you in here, right? And then that way they always know what to expect because consistency builds trust. It's when
Mhm.
teachers act different on a Friday when they're tired and exhausted versus a Monday when they're caffeinated and feeling rested, that students are like, I don't know what to expect. I can't even make an informed decision about my behavior because the teacher always responds kind of differently. So it's like, yeah, put those very basic guardrails in place before you try a station rotation. But I can tell you, I only taught at the secondary level and I use station rotation all the time. And it was literally magical to be able to be like, kids have this particular need. I want to be able to work with them. And instead of thinking, can you come in at lunch? Can you stay in at break? Do you have to race out after school? When could I possibly meet your specific need? Now I have an instructional model where I can design to meet those needs.
So when you're designing your station and your station groups, is it always best to ability group them, or are there reasons why you would do it in an interest area or let students self-select?
A hundred
On that?
percent. I flexible grouping, that is the key phrase, right? I really worry about, and often when teachers are first trying station rotation, they're doing it for that ability to differentiate. And so their go-to is skill level groupings or readiness level groupings, which I totally understand. But if we always put students in ability level groupings, I personally worry about what that does to their confidence in themselves as a learner, their that growth mindset of I can keep improving with practice and support and all these things. I also I just worry it makes some of the other tasks that they might do at another station on their own more challenging if they're in skill level groupings, right? Often high level groups, you got a lot of like bulldozers. I am one of those people
Mhm.
who take over and they don't work very well together. Then you get the lower level kiddos who might be feeling like they wish they had a little more peer support with some of those bulldozers. And so lots of reasons why we should just be flexible in our groupings. And when I work and train teachers, when we talk about the teacher-led station and the ways in which we can structure instruction at that station, if you use a very clear instructional strategy, like a gradual release or hook the group or concept attainment, you can actually you see exactly where you can differentiate for a mixed ability group. It doesn't have to be a skill-based group for you to actually differentiate. So, for example, if I'm running small groups and it's mixed ability and I'm using an I do, we do, pairs do progression, like that gradual release, the I do, I'm carrying the cognitive load. It's going to be the same for everybody, and it's not that big a deal. The we do, I can even be subtle about what kinds of questions, level of questioning I'm using with different students in that group. And then when we get to the pairs do, strategically pairing students at similar ability levels and asking them to work on practice within their zone of possibility is where the more kind of explicit differentiation is happening. And then I can spend time with a pairing who might be struggling a little bit more and need more from me as the teacher. And then sometimes, to your point, it's interest-based groups. Sometimes it's, I like to think of like strengths in a group dynamic, right? So if we have one of the stations, they're working on a STEM challenge together or something, I want a nice kind of blend of personalities and abilities in that group. So there's lots of different ways to group kids, and I would encourage teachers just keep it flexible.
And you touched on this just a little bit, just with the, if you have to check in with pairs or things like that. But what is the best method for checking in with groups or conferencing with groups as you've released them and the stations are kind of taking place? What's the best ways for checking in with various groups in the different, maybe there's different scenarios or things that you maybe could bring up, but what would you say is the best routine for that?
Well, usually the teacher is occupied at the teacher-led station the entire time, unless they're using a strategy that I call the empty station strategy. So one of the bigger, I think, design hiccups that secondary teachers face, particularly in classes where the curriculum is very linear, like math, is the lesson starts with the teacher instruction and then everything after it builds on that instruction. So then teachers are like, how do I reimagine my curriculum for a rotation where kids are starting at all of these other stations and only one group is starting with me? And so teachers who get kind of hung up in that hiccup, I encourage them, if you usually have 3 stations, if you can add a 4th, great. So that there's a group that starts with the teacher led. The next station is what I call the application station, and it's empty during the first rotation. So nobody starts there because nobody's going to apply before they've been to that teacher-led station. Then you have your online and your offline stations, which are hopefully things like spiral review. Maybe kids are working on collaborative work or things that are not dependent on that teacher-led station. So the first rotation, the teacher provides instruction. Then in rotation 2, that teacher-led station group goes to the apply station, and now one of the other stations is empty. So when teachers use that to make space for more of that linear, I'm going to teach you something and then I want you to apply it, the final rotation means that the teacher-led station is empty and the teacher can move around the room to check in with students. So it might be observing students at work and kind of documenting what were that formative assessment data that we're collecting. It might be just that we noted that in an earlier lesson, students were struggling with something. So we want to go check in with two students we're concerned about. So it's more of like an organic at that point, moving around the room, checking in, observing, documenting, which is all really, really valuable. Now, there are other instructional models, blended learning models like playlist model, where we do much more structured conferencing, feedback sessions, things like that are actually built into the instructional pathway so that when students hit that moment in, say, a playlist, they pause in their progress, they go meet with the teacher, and the teacher basically looks at kind of the work that's been done, has a conversation with the student, and they can make adjustments to the playlist as needed based on student performance. So that particular model, I feel like, allows for more of that kind of built-in conferencing about progress.
And so you brought up playlists, so I want to touch on that a little bit. What is the ultimate purpose of a playlist? Is there one design that works best, or what are some effective ones that you've seen?
Yeah, so the playlist model is like a self-paced learning pathway. So ideally, everything students need is in the playlist, which means we're leaning hard on video and other multimedia resources. So students have on-demand instruction built into the playlist. I still really want teachers to have a really nice blend of online and offline activities. So I don't want, again, kids staring at the screen because everything in the playlist is online. I want the playlist to push them offline for, pen, paper tasks, discussions, collaborative work. But within the playlist, one of the things that they're really good for anything that takes students a real significant variable amount of time to complete. So for me in my English class, writing an essay, some students could sit down and write an essay in a couple sittings. Some students, it was like a 2-week slog to write an essay. And so I remember deciding to use the playlist to do things like create an argumentative essay playlist. And it didn't mean that we worked on that playlist nonstop over the course of 5 days or something, but it meant that we might work on it one class period, do something the next period, go back to it the period after. And what I really loved about it is it took a lot. Now that one definitely took a lot of time to design on the front end. And AI is so exciting to use for it because it definitely helps to kind of limit the amount of time it takes to design one now. But that time investment on the front end allowed me in the classroom to conference with students, to give them real-time feedback as they were working. So they would hit these like bars in the playlist because I just built them in a Google Doc. It was basically like a 2-column doc. Here's what you're doing. Here's where you capture your work. So the instructions and links and everything they needed was on the left-hand side. All of the space for their work was on the right-hand side. And there would be these like yellow bars that said Tucker time. And they knew when they got to one of these yellow bars, they had to pause and they had to come meet with me. And so I would look at what they had done so far. I would give them focused, actionable feedback, ask them if they had questions, send them on their way. So all of the time I used to spend giving feedback and grading student writing before the playlist became my go-to approach for, extended writing projects was all of a sudden built into the classroom. So I wasn't taking any of that home anymore. And I was getting to sit one-on-one with kids and have these conversations. It was like totally magical.
So one of the things too that has been coming up a lot is in AI has been like this idea of process over product. And it seems like the process aspect could actually fit really well into the playlist model. One of the concerns that obviously comes up with AI in general, but with when you're letting go of the control and that kind of thing, and you're letting students do the self-pacing, what kind of guardrails do you think we should have in place to still allow for student choice, but with respect to, okay, well, they can use AI for these things, but with the process over product conversation, and Jeremy and I have talked with others about this, is that you're actually building in the AI use in a designed way and saying you can use it for these scenarios, not for these scenarios, and that kind of thing. So as you look at that conversation with AI and with the playlist model and that, what do you think can help with some of the guardrails for teachers, especially those that are have significant concerns about releasing their students to AI?
Yeah, I think we have to be explicit teaching them, to your point, what's okay in terms of AI use for different assignments, right? What role should AI play in the work that they're doing, right? And they need to be able to attribute the work that they basically might have co-authored or worked on together with AI. I think sometimes we almost treat AI use as like, let's just not talk about it and let's hope they're not using it. And I'm just like, no, let's have the conversation. Here's what AI does well. Here's what, it doesn't do so well. Here's the places where we're going to use it in this class. And, I've even seen, like, I've chatted with Matt Miller around like, hey, maybe we just have like icons next to assignments that basically align with like, this is the level of AI you're allowed to use in this assignment. And maybe if you use AI, I want you to be able to explain what you learned, how it impacted your work, how you kept the thinking your own. I also think students need training around prompting if they're using AI, right? Like what kinds of questions, if the goal is feedback and you're working in an AI space, what kinds of questions should you be asking? What do those sound like? Like even scaffolding it with question stems that students can use and lean on. I think we have to remember that this is a skill like any other skill, and we have to be explicit about teaching it and setting expectations. We have to model, and we have to be thinking about what supports and scaffolds are going to help students be successful, right? This is just going to be part of their lives, and it's going to increasingly be something we have to weave into our classroom. And that's not just using it, it's really the whole skill set that students need to use it.
Yeah, and that's something too that we've seen with other schools that have done that too with regard to AI and using like there's use cases of AI in assessment and how you might use it in writing and things like that, and what's an acceptable use versus an unacceptable use for that, and then having conversations with the students about why it is or isn't acceptable. And so if you're looking at AI and just thinking about, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. I totally forgot what I was going to say. We'll just leave it at that, actually.
Okay.
But anyway, I can edit this part out, but we've seen that there's a school, Bloomington Public Schools, that did something very interesting with that, where they had these color coded icons and then just asked the teachers to put it on all of their assignments. So that it communicated to the student, like, okay, this is what's acceptable. And then they use these little like green and red check marks and things like that. I think we talked with Matt about that too, Jeremy, but about that model. But anyway, sorry, I totally screwed up the flow here. So we'll go to 8 after this. So Jeremy, if you want to give it a second and then you come in.
So Catlin, we've talked, I think, about a lot of different things here in the past 50 minutes or so. That time has just really flown by. But I want to kind of get us around to hear some valuable takeaways that both teachers and leaders or coaches could start implementing here like right away. So as we think about it from like the teacher lens, what's one small high impact move that you would recommend that a teacher try? And I'm going to say, because we're recording this, it's very near the end of the school year, but when they come back into that classroom, and maybe it's something that they've given a little bit of thought to as they're preparing for that next school year, and they want to hit the ground, running and being successful from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, we've already talked about the would you rather and starting to be intentional about identifying where might there be a potential barrier that a would you rather would give students some agency around deciding how they want to complete a particular task. I also think our earlier conversation about reflection and where are those places that we can build in a pause. It doesn't have to be more than 5 minutes, but maybe it is that pause that follows instruction for kids to collect their thoughts, or to your point at the end of a lesson where we're asking them to kind of think about what they learned and kind of condense it for themselves, or capture it. Or maybe it is that pause before and after AI use for that reflective practice. I think both of those are so simple, like initial moves that can have a huge impact.
So putting that, that teacher pause time, like, well, students are thinking, and allow that for yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now think of it from maybe like a building administrator or an instructional coach sort of lens here. What sort of conditions would you want to create for that start of the school year so that teachers are able to feel supported in doing some of the deep work that they need to, and maybe even, feeling empowered to add AI into helping them develop some of the things that they're working on?
Yeah, I mean, and this is way easier said than done, but like create a culture on your campus of experimentation and celebration, right? So maybe it's a staff meeting where you ask teachers, so you give them 5 minutes to share something that they did that either worked or didn't work, and what did they learn from it, right? I would love to see more, like, let's tap into the incredible professionals on our campus who are trying things, and whether those things work or not, what are they learning from them that might be valuable to the rest of the staff? And second, just from a leadership perspective, given the conversation about screen time, instead of a knee-jerk response to whatever your stance is on tech in classrooms and screen time, start thinking about how you might facilitate an audit using coaches, using teachers with a self-assessment, or even putting PLCs on it, to start thinking about how are we actually using screens? What is the impact? Is it improving learning? Like, start to have those conversations, start to figure out what's the system in place for supporting those.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it gives, people a chance to kind of reflect where they're at the end of the school year, like you talked about a little bit earlier, and also to start to make plans to either help to develop that culture. So when teachers come back, or just be that teacher and ready to add, would you rather into their mode of teaching. So we're kind of reaching the end of our time here, and David and I like to end with a lightning round activity. So I know you've had a chance to look at some of the questions that are there, and we'll start out alternating them, going through. You're free to give just a short response, or if you need to elaborate to explain yourself, the time for you is there. But I think, David, you're going to kick us off with the first one.
Yeah. So we actually had a little bit of a long weekend here, but what's a song or artist that never fails to reset your mood after a long week?
I know this is controversial, but it is Taylor Swift, who literally has an album for every single mood I might be in.
Actually, I'm a closet Swiftie myself, so
I am loud and proud.
I get it. What's your go-to comfort food after a long work week?
Mexican is for sure my favorite comfort food, specifically vegetarian burritos with lots of guacamole.
All right. If you could take a 1 week learning trip anywhere, not work related, but a 1 week learning trip, where are you going and what are you learning about?
New Zealand, although that feels like a very far way to go for 1 week, but there's some really, well, first of all, it's beautiful. I'd love to be there. And there was some really early research done in the field of blended learning that came out of New Zealand. So I just love to go pick brains of researchers who did a lot of the work around blended learning.
And that's your non-work related trip. I get it.
I don't think I take a trip where I'm not doing it. I'm either writing or whatever. I love my work, so I tend to do it everywhere.
That's awesome. That's when you know you've got that passion, right?
Yes.
What's something that most people would be surprised to learn about you?
Ooh, I am really afraid of heights.
So no mountains in New Zealand.
I climb Table Mountain in Cape Town, but I don't want to get real close to the edge because my fingers start to tingle. Like, even watching somebody else at the edge, my fingers start to tingle.
Okay. What's a book, movie, or show that you love right now?
I love TJ Klune's The House in the Cerulean Sea, and now I am reading the follow-up, which is called Somewhere Beyond the Sea. It's just like the sweetest stories. I love them.
So if David and I were planning a conference and you were going to be our keynote speaker, and it's that moment where you're going to be coming from backstage and out in front of the entire audience, what sort of walk-up song do you want playing for you as you're getting ready to face the crowd?
I did have to think about this one, but I'm going to go with High Hopes from Panic at the Disco.
Nice.
Because I have very high hopes for education, everybody.
Nice. Okay, and so this is our last one. It's just either or,
Okay.
Rapid fire. So are you a notebook and paper person still, or a notes app?
Notebook and paper.
Okay. And then while traveling, podcasts or music?
Music.
Okay. Mountains or beach?
Beach.
All right. we're increasing our beach people. We get a lot of mountain responses. So text or call?
Text.
Okay. Early bird or night owl?
Early bird.
First to leave the party or last to stay?
First to leave.
Okay. And then big group hangout or one-on-one time?
One-on-one time.
All right. Cool. Well, that concludes our lightning round in this or that sections. We just want to give you a chance, Catlin, too, to also, if there's anything that you have that's coming up that you want to plug, talks and our conferences, all that type of things, the books, is there anything that you want to mention there to the listeners?
I mean, my most recent book, for anybody who's in, like, kind of their antenna was dinging or their interest was piqued, is the Station Rotation Model and UDL. And I am currently in the middle of another book project, but that one won't be out until next spring. But it's on multi-tiered systems of support, Tier 1 and Tier 2 for classroom teachers.
Awesome. Sounds good. And we'll be sure to, in the show notes, you can access Catlin's work, the website, books, all that kind of thing in there. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate your time and all the insights that you provided. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks,
Thank you guys for having me.